Welcome back to the EPRS Chronicles for our second and final episode on our series on migration. In episode 1, we discussed irregular migration to the EU. In this episode, we will focus on asylum seeking once in the EU. For this, I'm joined by Anita Orov, policy analyst for the EPRS. Hello, Anita.
Hello, Kelly.
Let's start by talking about numbers, because in 2022, we saw almost 1 million asylum-seeking requests to the EU. Can you tell us a little more about who these asylum seekers are?
Indeed, last year we had a very high number of asylum seekers again, which approaches the peak of 2015-16. And this comes on top of the 4.8 million Ukrainians who have registered for temporary protection in the EU countries. Asylum seekers last year mainly came from Syria, Afghanistan, Turkey and Venezuela, which with some variation has been the case for several years now. These are young people. 80% of them were under 35 years old and 1/3 were minors. 70% of them were men and 30% were women. And this is different from the Ukrainians, who are mostly women and children, as men aged 18 to 60 had to stay behind under martial law.
And under the current rules, once they have arrived, people looking for protection will apply in one member state, not the EU as a whole. Do asylum seekers have any say in which country they wish to settle in?
No, they are not allowed to choose which country to apply for asylum. And under the current EU system, called the Dublin system, normally they should apply for asylum in the first country of entry. So it means that as soon as they cross the border, they should apply for asylum. And this, of course, means that the countries located at the EU external borders will get a higher number of requests.
How does this work in practice? Following this logic, we would see asylum seekers concentrated in Spain, Greece, Italy, or any country that has an external border only.
Indeed, and this logic has failed the current Dublin system, which is simply not suited for mass arrival of migrants. So what it means is that the frontline countries, they simply do not have enough reception capacity. They have nowhere to accommodate these people who arrive all at once. They do not have enough staff to register them or process their asylum application in the foreseen time frame, which is no longer than 6 months. So as a result, the reception conditions are poor, people live even on the street, and their asylum decisions take far longer than 6 months.
This doesn't seem very fair for asylum seekers or frontline countries.
Yes, this is true. And that's why the frontline countries have constantly asked for more support and solidarity from other EU countries, and the asylum seekers have often overlooked the obligation to stay in the frontline countries and have moved forward to apply for asylum. These secondary movements are possible because in the Schengen area there are no internal border controls, which means that their movements go largely undetected. And if we put the secondary movements in numbers, last year again Germany was the country with the highest number of asylum applications, almost 218,000, and as we know, Germany is not located at the EU external border.
It is not. So in that case, what can be done to overcome the issue of overburdened frontline countries and unauthorized secondary movements?
One idea is that if asylum seekers were initially redistributed, it would remove the need for secondary movements. And also it would mean that no country alone would be under disproportionate pressure. And if we think of the number of arrivals, if divided among 27 member states instead of 2 or 3, the numbers also would not be so daunting. And we're talking about solidarity and fair sharing of responsibility here, which are two principles that underpin EU asylum law. However, they are not defined, which leaves room for interpretation. The European Commission has tried to overcome this issue by proposing a solidarity mechanism that would help to redistribute asylum seekers more evenly across the EU, but the discussions have been very long and complicated.
And why is that?
I see 3 issues here. First of all, it is true that member states are not affected in the same way by arrival of asylum seekers. And also, Secondly, maintaining this broken system creates mistrust between member states and keeps feeding it constantly. And thirdly, there has been a rise in the popularity of anti-immigration parties, which makes finding compromises even more difficult.
So the debate is still out on how the current EU asylum rules work. Let's speak a little bit about the reception of Ukrainian refugees, because after the invasion of 2022, we received several Ukrainian refugees within the EU member states. Can you tell us a little more about that process?
Yes, Europeans mobilized themselves very quickly when it came to receiving Ukrainian refugees. And the EU, on its part, activated for the first time ever the Temporary Protection Directive, which grants immediate protection to people fleeing from Ukraine. And what it means in practical terms is that Ukrainians get help at the borders, they get humanitarian aid, and most importantly, a clear legal status in EU member states, which allows them to work and live in the EU and also move between countries.
All right, so in contrast with the problems we saw with the Dublin system, when it came to welcoming Ukrainians, we see that member states are able to act swiftly, decisively, and with solidarity. What do you think the reasons for this might be?
I think Europeans have been more open and willing to receive Ukrainians because of geography, shared history and cultural ties. Also, there is a large Ukrainian diaspora already in Europe that helps the newcomers to settle in. Also, I think the threat from Russia has not been forgotten in many parts of Europe, and especially the Eastern European countries now have shown more support and solidarity with refugees. And I think that if this solidarity could be transferred to the overall EU asylum system, then we would finally be able to achieve the reform and offer dignified conditions to any person arriving at any EU border looking for protection.
Thank you, Anita.
Thank you.
This concludes our two-part series on migration. For more content on the EU's most important topics, subscribe to the EPRS channel. Thanks for watching.